Hello, good souls. Welcome back to Angelical Balance. You know that feeling when you're driving alone through the dark, miles from anywhere, and you see something that shouldn't be there? Someone standing where no one should be standing? That's the kind of fear we're diving into today. I'm your host, and what you're about to hear comes from Derek in Duluth, Minnesota. This happened back in the brutal winter of 2019, the kind of cold that kills you in minutes. The kind of cold where if you see someone outside without proper gear, you know something's wrong. But before we get into Derek's nightmare, if you're here for stories that'll make you check your rearview mirror twice, hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever seen something on a lonely road that you just couldn't explain? I read every single one. And listen, if you've got your own story that keeps you up at night, something that happened to you that nobody believes, send it to me. Emails in the description. If it's real, if it's terrifying, if it haunts you the way Derek's story haunts him, I'll share it right here. Fair warning on this one, Derek quit his job over what happened. He moved. He still hears footsteps on his roof 5 years later. This isn't the kind of story that ends when the video does. So, headphones on, lights down. Maybe keep them on for this one. Let's find that balance between what we know and what's standing in the road ahead, waiting in the cold.
Story 1 comes from Derek Williamson, Duluth, Minnesota. I never believed in anything supernatural until the winter of 2019. I was 28 years old, working as a regional manager for a lumber supply company, and I spent most of my time driving between our various locations across northern Minnesota. It was honest work, and I liked the solitude of those long drives through the forests and frozen lakes. That winter was particularly brutal. Temperatures regularly dropped to 20 below, and the snow seemed endless. But I was used to it. I'd grown up in Duluth, and the cold was just part of life. The incident happened in early February during one of the worst cold snaps I can remember. I'd been sent to check on a small satellite office we maintain near the Boundary Waters, about 3 hours north of Duluth. The office was basically just a glorified cabin where we stored equipment and kept records for the logging operations in that region. We'd been having issues with the heating system, and since I was the only one willing to make the drive in that weather, I volunteered. I left Duluth around 2 in the afternoon, figuring I'd get there before dark, check the furnace, make sure everything was secure, and drive back the same night. My wife, Jennifer, wasn't thrilled about me making the trip alone in that cold, but we needed that facility operational. I promised her I'd call when I got there, and again when I started back. The drive up was uneventful for the first 2 hours. Highway 61 along Lake Superior was clear enough, and once I turned inland onto the smaller county roads, the plows had done their job. The sun was already getting low. It sets early in February up there, and the sky had that pale, washed-out quality that comes before a really cold night. The radio kept crackling in and out, mostly static, with occasional bursts of classic rock or news. I remember hearing something about a winter storm warning, but it was supposed to hold off until the next day. Around 4:30, just as the sun was touching the treetops, I turned onto the Forest Service road that led to our cabin. This was the sketchy part, a narrow, winding road that cut through dense pine forest for about 12 miles. The company paid to have it plowed, but only once a week, and there was always fresh snow drifting across it. My truck handled it fine, but I had to take it slow. That's when I first saw the figure. It was standing about 50 yards ahead, right in the middle of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. We had to watch for them constantly. But as my headlights swept over it, I realized it was a person. A man from the build of him, wearing what looked like a dark coat and standing completely still. I slowed down, confused. There were no other tire tracks on this road, no houses for miles, and the temperature was already down to 15 below. Nobody should have been out here on foot. I stopped about 20 feet away and hit my high beams. That's when my heart started pounding. The man wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing just a thin, dark jacket, no hat, no gloves, no scarf, and he wasn't moving, not shivering, not stamping his feet, nothing, just standing there facing me, completely motionless in the glare of my headlights. I honked my horn. Nothing. He didn't wave, didn't move, didn't react at all. I sat there for probably 30 seconds, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just drive around him and keep going, but I knew I couldn't do that. If this guy was in trouble, lost, hypothermic, whatever, I couldn't just leave him. People died in this kind of cold. I put the truck in park and grabbed my flashlight from the glove box. When I opened the door, the cold hit me like a wall. The wind had picked up, and it cut right through my heavy coat. I kept the engine running and walked toward the man, my boots crunching in the snow. "Hey," I called out, "are you okay? Do you need help?" He didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly in the beam of my flashlight. He was maybe in his 40s, with dark hair and pale skin. His eyes were open, staring at me, but his expression was completely blank. And there was something wrong with the way he was standing, too rigid, like a mannequin. "Sir, you're going to freeze to death out here," I said, now about 10 feet away. "My truck's warm. Let me give you a ride." Still nothing, not even a blink. That's when I noticed his breath, or rather, the lack of it. I could see my own breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air, but nothing was coming from him. No condensation, no fog, nothing. It was like he wasn't breathing at all. Every instinct I had started screaming at me to get back in the truck. Something was very wrong here. "I'm going to call for help," I said, backing away slowly. Just stay there." I turned and walked quickly back to my truck, fighting the urge to run. I climbed in and immediately locked the doors, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, we were too deep in the woods. I looked back at where the man had been standing. He was gone. I swept my headlights back and forth across the road. Nothing. No footprints leading off into the woods. No sign of him anywhere. He'd just vanished. My heart was hammering now. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe he'd run off into the trees when I wasn't looking. Maybe he was on drugs or hypothermic and confused. Maybe I imagined the thing with the breath. But I knew what I'd seen. I thought about turning around, heading back to Duluth, but I was already more than halfway there, and the cabin wasn't much farther. I'd get there, do what I needed to do, and leave. Quick and simple. I put the truck in drive and continued up the road, checking my mirrors constantly. The forest pressed in close on both sides, the pine trees black against the darkening sky. Every shadow looked like a person. Every drift of snow across the road made my stomach clench. I reached the cabin just after 5 o'clock. It was a small, sturdy building set in a clearing, with our company logo on a sign out front. There was a security light on a pole that had kicked on, casting harsh white light across the snow. I parked as close to the door as I could and grabbed my keys and flashlight. The cabin was cold inside, but not frozen. The furnace was running, though I could tell it was struggling. I went through my checklist quickly, checking the propane levels, inspecting the furnace itself, making sure none of the pipes had frozen. Everything seemed okay. The heating system just needed a new thermostat, which I could order when I got back. I was finishing, about to leave, when I heard it. Footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, walking from one end of the cabin to the other, right above my head. I froze, my flashlight pointed at the ceiling. The steps continued, thump, 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 slow and steady. Then they stopped directly above me. I stood there in the dark, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The silence stretched out. Then, very slowly, the footsteps started again, moving back across the roof toward the front of the cabin. I ran for the door. I burst outside into the cold and immediately looked up at the roof. Nothing. The metal roof was covered with a smooth layer of snow. No footprints, no marks, nothing. But I'd heard them. I knew I'd heard them. I ran to my truck and got in, locking the doors. I started the engine with shaking hands and threw it into reverse. As I backed up, my headlights swept across the front of the cabin. The man from the road was standing in the doorway. I slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding slightly in the snow. He was just standing there, in the open doorway, staring at me with that same blank expression.
But now I could see his face more clearly, and something was terribly wrong with it. His skin was too pale, almost gray, and his eyes were too dark, like empty pits. I didn't think. I just drove. I yanked the wheel around and hit the gas, the truck fishtailing as I accelerated down the road. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see him following, but there was nothing, just darkness and the red glow of my taillights on the snow. I drove like a maniac for those 12 miles back to the county road, my hands cramping on the wheel. I didn't slow down until I hit the highway, and even then I kept looking in the mirrors. The radio was just static now, a harsh hissing that filled the truck. That's when I saw him again. He was standing on the side of the road, maybe 100 yards ahead, illuminated by my headlights for just a second before I blew past. Then, another mile down the road, there he was again, standing in the trees just off the shoulder. And again, and again. Every few miles, I'd catch a glimpse of him, always standing still, always watching, always in that same thin jacket that should have killed him in minutes. I called Jennifer from the truck as soon as I got a signal, my voice shaking so badly she could barely understand me. I told her I was coming home, that something had happened, but I couldn't explain it. She heard the fear in my voice and didn't ask questions. The last time I saw him was just outside Duluth, about an hour from home. I was stopped at a red light on a completely empty stretch of highway. I looked over at the gas station on the corner, and he was standing under the lights by the pumps. Just standing there, watching me. The light turned green and I drove. I didn't stop until I was home. Jennifer was waiting up for me. I told her everything: the man in the road, the footsteps on the roof, the way he kept appearing. She believed me. She's known me long enough to know I don't make things up, don't exaggerate. She could see how shaken I was. I called my boss the next morning and quit. I told him I'd had a medical emergency and couldn't do the job anymore. He wasn't happy, but he didn't argue. I never went back to that cabin. I never drove that road again. For weeks afterward, I'd see him in crowds, just for a second, a figure in a dark jacket standing too still, watching from across a parking lot or down a street. Always too far away to be sure, but I knew it was him. Jennifer saw him too once, standing in our backyard at 3 a.m. She woke me up, terrified, and we watched him through the window for almost 20 minutes. He never moved. Then, suddenly, he was just gone. It's been over 5 years now, and I haven't seen him in a long time. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, I'll hear footsteps on our roof. Slow and deliberate, walking from one end to the other. Jennifer hears them too. We don't talk about it anymore. We just lie there in the dark, holding hands, and wait for them to stop. I still don't know what that thing was. I don't want to know. But I do know this: there are things in those northern forests that don't belong in this world. Things that look human, but aren't. Things that stand in the cold without breathing, that can't be escaped no matter how fast you drive. And sometimes, on the worst nights, I wonder if he's still out there, still standing on that road in his thin jacket, still waiting for the next person to come along.
Story 2 comes from Rachel Henderson, Jackson, Mississippi. 3 years ago, I inherited my grandmother's house on the outskirts of Jackson. I hadn't seen her much in the years before she passed. Life gets busy. And the 8-hour drive from Atlanta, where I was living, felt longer every time I made it. When the lawyer called to tell me she left me the property, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I should have visited more. I should have called more often. The house sat on about 5 acres of land, mostly overgrown woods and wild grass at the end of a long gravel driveway. It was a classic Southern home: white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, tall windows with dark green shutters. My grandmother had lived there alone for almost 30 years, ever since my grandfather died. The neighbors were few and far between out there, and the closest house was nearly half a mile away through the trees. I drove down in late August to start sorting through her things. The heat was oppressive, that thick, wet Mississippi heat that makes the air feel like soup. My plan was to spend a week cleaning out the house, decide what to keep, what to sell, and then put the property on the market. I wasn't attached to the place, or so I thought. The first 2 days were exhausting but uneventful. The house was full of decades of accumulated possessions: old furniture, boxes of photographs, cabinets full of dishes and linens. Everything smelled like lavender and dust. I stayed in my old bedroom, the one I'd slept in during childhood visits, with its faded floral wallpaper and creaky iron bed frame. On the 3rd night, I heard the singing. I'd been asleep for maybe an hour when it woke me up. At first I thought I was dreaming. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, singing something I didn't recognize. The words weren't in English, or at least not any English I could understand. It sounded old, like a hymn or a lullaby, and it was coming from somewhere inside the house. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The singing continued, drifting up from downstairs. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then slowly opened my bedroom door.
The hallway was dark and still. The singing was clearer now. It was definitely coming from the first floor. Maybe the kitchen or the back of the house. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped immediately. I stood there in the doorway, listening to the silence. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd been hearing things. Maybe a dream that had bled into waking, or the old house settling in weird ways. I went back to bed, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I noticed something strange. The back door was unlocked. I specifically remember checking all the locks before bed. I'd been nervous about staying in the house alone, and I'd made sure everything was secure. But the deadbolt was turned, and when I tested the door, it swung open easily. I stepped out onto the back porch, looking around the overgrown yard. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints in the dirt, no signs that anyone had been there. I locked the door again and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. That afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a leather journal, old and worn with my grandmother's handwriting inside. Most of it was mundane: grocery lists, garden notes, Bible verses. But toward the back, the entries changed. "She came again last night. I heard her in the kitchen singing that awful song. I pretended to sleep. In the morning, she'd moved all the photographs on the mantel, always the same ones, the pictures of the baby." I flipped back through the pages. There were dozens of entries like this, going back almost 10 years. My grandmother had been experiencing the same thing I had: the singing, the unlocked doors, things being moved. She called the presence "she," but never gave it a name. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before my grandmother died. "I'm tired of being afraid in my own home. Tonight, if she comes, I'm going to face her. I need to know what she wants. I need to understand why she won't leave me alone." There were no more entries after that. I called my mother that evening, asked her if grandmother had ever mentioned anything strange about the house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Why are you asking?" my mother said finally. I told her about the journal, about the singing. Another long pause. "Your grandmother had a daughter before she had me. This was back in 1947. The baby only lived 3 days. They never told anyone outside the family. It wasn't something people talked about back then. Your grandmother named her Caroline." "What happened to her?" "She's buried on the property somewhere. Your grandfather wouldn't let your grandmother put up a proper marker. He thought it was bad luck, dwelling on it. After he died, your grandmother tried to find the grave to give it a headstone, but she never could. The property was different back then, more wild. She searched for years." We talked for a while longer, but I barely heard what my mother was saying. All I could think about was that tiny grave somewhere in the overgrown woods around the house, unmarked and forgotten. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, the journal open on my lap, reading through my grandmother's entries again and again. She'd been tormented by this presence for a decade. Whatever it was, it had been in this house with her night after night, and she'd been too afraid or too proud to tell anyone. Around 2 in the morning, the lights went out. All of them, simultaneously. The house was plunged into complete darkness. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I turned on the flashlight and saw that the lamp beside me was still switched on. The power hadn't gone out. The bulb had just stopped working. I tried the overhead lights. Nothing. Then I heard it. The singing. It was coming from upstairs this time, from my bedroom. The same melody, the same incomprehensible words, but louder now, more insistent. And underneath the singing, I could hear something else, a soft sound like someone crying. I should have run. I should have grabbed my keys and gotten out of that house. But something made me stay. Maybe it was the thought of my grandmother living with this terror for so long. Maybe it was the image of that tiny grave lost and alone in the woods. I climbed the stairs slowly, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The singing got louder with each step. When I reached the top, I could see that my bedroom door was open. I'd closed it. I was certain I'd closed it. The singing was coming from inside. I stepped into the doorway and swept the light across the room. At first, I didn't see anything. Just my bed, my suitcase, the old dresser. Then the beam of light caught something on the wall above the bed. Someone had written on the wallpaper in what looked like ash or soot. 2 words in shaky letters. Find me. The singing stopped. I stood there, frozen, staring at those words. Then very slowly, I became aware of a presence in the room with me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, a coldness in the air, a pressure like someone standing very close. "Caroline?" I whispered. The temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath now, even though it was August in Mississippi. The curtains began to move, even though the windows were closed. And then I heard it, not singing this time, but a voice, a child's voice, soft and sad. Lost, so lost. I don't remember making the decision. I just knew what I had to do. I spent the entire next day searching for the property. I walked every inch of those 5 acres looking for anything that might indicate a grave, a depression in the ground, a pattern of stones, anything. The heat was brutal and the mosquitoes were worse, but I didn't stop. It was almost sunset when I found it. There was an old oak tree near the back of the property, massive and gnarled, and at its base the ground was slightly sunken. I knelt down and started digging with my hands, pulling away years of dead leaves and dirt. About 6 inches down, my fingers hit something hard, a stone, flat and smooth. I cleared away more dirt and found others, a rough circle of stones, each about the size of my palm. Someone had placed them there deliberately a long time ago.
I sat back on my heels, tears streaming down my face. This was it. This was Caroline's grave, marked only by these simple stones that had been slowly swallowed by the earth. I went back to the house and searched through my grandmother's things until I found what I was looking for, a box of photographs, old black and white pictures from the 1940s. Near the bottom, I found one of my grandmother as a young woman, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth. Her face was heartbroken. I took the photograph back to the grave as the sun was setting. I placed it gently on the stones, weighing it down with a larger rock so the wind wouldn't take it. "I found you," I said out loud. "You're not lost anymore. Your mother looked for you. She never forgot you." The air around me seemed to shift, to lighten. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, like a hand touching my heart. And then it was gone. That oppressive presence that had filled the house, the weight that had been pressing down on everything, it just lifted. I slept peacefully that night for the first time since I'd arrived. No singing, no footsteps, no unlocked doors. The house felt different, emptier, but in a good way.
like something that had been trapped there for decades had finally been released. The next morning, I called a local monument company. I had them install a proper headstone at the grave, a small marble marker that read, Caroline Henderson, 1947, forever loved, finally found. I kept the house. I couldn't sell it after that. I had it fixed up, dealt with all the deferred maintenance my grandmother had let slide. I visit every few months now, and sometimes I stay for weeks at a time. It's peaceful there, in a way I never expected. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on the back porch and watch the fireflies drift through the trees. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a hint of that melody on the wind. But it's different now. Not sad or haunting, but gentle, like a lullaby, sung by a mother to her child. The photograph I left on the grave disappeared after a few days. I'd wrapped it in plastic to protect it from the weather, but when I went back to check on it, it was gone. No sign of animals disturbing it, no evidence of wind or rain carrying it away. Just gone. I like to think Caroline took it with her wherever she went. I like to think she's with my grandmother now, and they're finally together the way they should have been all along. But here's the thing that still keeps me up some nights. About a month after I installed the headstone, I was going through more of my grandmother's papers and found a birth certificate. Caroline Henderson, born August 15, 1947, died August 18, 1947. I looked at the dates again and again, my hands shaking. August 18th was the date of the first journal entry where my grandmother mentioned the singing, exactly 60 years to the day before I arrived at the house. And August 15th, Caroline's birthday, was the night I'd first heard the singing myself. I still don't know what that means. I don't know if Caroline had been trying to reach out on the anniversary of her birth, or if there's some significance to those dates that I'm missing. But what I do know is this. There are some griefs so deep, so profound, that they don't die with us. They linger, searching for resolution, for acknowledgement, for love. My grandmother carried the loss of her daughter for her entire life, and somehow that pain became so powerful that it created something that remained even after she was gone. A mother's love that couldn't rest, and a child's soul that couldn't find its way home. I'm just glad I could help them find each other in the end. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I hadn't found that grave, if I hadn't put up that headstone, how long would Caroline have kept searching? How long would she have wandered through that house, singing her sad song, moving photographs, trying desperately to make someone understand? And I wonder how many other houses there are, with their own lost children, their own forgotten graves, their own ghosts singing in the dark.
Story 3 comes from Stephen Patterson, Burlington, Vermont. What happened to me in the fall of 2018 changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I was 32 years old, recently divorced, and working as a freelance photographer specializing in New England landscapes. I'd moved to Burlington after the divorce, wanting a fresh start somewhere beautiful and quiet. Vermont seemed perfect. Small towns, covered bridges, mountains blazing with fall colors. It was exactly the kind of peaceful environment I needed to put my life back together. I'd been living in a small rental house on the outskirts of Burlington for about 6 months when I got a commission that seemed too good to be true. A regional tourism magazine wanted a series of photos showcasing Vermont's most isolated and picturesque locations. They were paying well, and they wanted shots that tourists never saw.
The hidden places, the forgotten corners. It was exactly my kind of work. The editor sent me a list of potential locations, and one immediately caught my attention. An abandoned town called Stillwater, deep in the Green Mountains. I'd never heard of it, but when I looked it up, I found a few scattered references online. Stillwater had been a small logging community in the early 1900s, about 40 families at its peak. According to the sparse information I could find, everyone had left suddenly in 1924. No official explanation, no records of where they went. The town had just been abandoned, and the forest had slowly reclaimed it. The few photos I found online were intriguing. Collapsed houses, an old church with its steeple still standing, a cemetery with weathered headstones. It was perfect, remote, atmospheric, and apparently rarely visited. I decided to make it my first shoot. I planned the trip for late October, hoping to catch the tail end of fall foliage. The drive from Burlington took almost 3 hours, the last hour on increasingly rough Forest Service roads. My GPS lost signal about halfway in, but I'd printed out directions from a hiking forum where someone had posted about visiting the site. The final 2 miles were on foot. I parked at an overgrown trailhead and loaded my camera gear into my backpack. It was about 1 in the afternoon, and the forest was absolutely silent except for the crunch of leaves under my boots. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence that sometimes settles over the woods. I found Stillwater after about 40 minutes of hiking. The town appeared suddenly, the trees giving way to a large clearing where nature and abandonment had created something both beautiful and unsettling. There were maybe 20 structures still partially standing, houses with caved-in roofs, and general store with broken windows. That church I'd seen in the photos. Everything was being slowly consumed by vines and moss. The light was perfect, filtering through the trees in golden shafts. I spent about an hour taking photos, moving from building to building, fascinated by the way time had frozen this place. There were still objects inside some of the houses: a rusted iron stove, a broken chair, shattered dishes. In one house, I found a child's doll lying on the floor, its porcelain face cracked, but still somehow serene. That's when I noticed something odd. In every building I entered, there was a door. Not the front door or back door, but an interior door, always painted black, always closed. They seemed to be in random locations, in the middle of a wall where no door should be, in a corner, once even in the floor of an upstairs room. Each one was just a simple wooden door, painted black, with no visible lock or handle. I photographed several of them, intrigued by this strange architectural quirk. Maybe it had been some kind of local tradition or a peculiarity of whoever had built these houses. It was odd, but not alarming. Until I tried to open one. I was in the old church, photographing the interior where the roof had partially collapsed, letting in streams of sunlight. At the back of the church, behind where the pulpit would have been, there was one of those black doors. This one was different, though. It had a handle, a simple iron ring. I don't know what made me try it. Curiosity, maybe? Or the photographer's instinct to document everything. I reached out and pulled. The door swung open silently, easily, despite what must have been decades without maintenance. Behind it was a hallway. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The hallway was impossible. It was too long to fit within the church's dimensions, and it was in perfect condition. Clean white walls, polished wooden floor, and small electric lights along the ceiling that were somehow still working, casting a warm, steady glow. I should have closed the door and walked away. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that something was wrong. But I'd also been spending years as a photographer, documenting the strange and unusual, and my curiosity was overwhelming.
I stepped through the doorway. The air changed immediately. It was warmer in the hallway, and it smelled like cleaning products and fresh paint. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click, and I felt a moment of panic. I turned and tried the handle. Story 3 comes from Stephen Patterson, Burlington, Vermont. What happened to me in the fall of 2018 changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I was 32 years old, recently divorced, and working as a freelance photographer specializing in New England landscapes. I'd moved to Burlington after the divorce, wanting a fresh start, somewhere beautiful and quiet. Vermont seemed perfect. Small towns, covered bridges, mountains blazing with fall colors. It was exactly the kind of peaceful environment I needed to put my life back together. I'd been living in a small rental house on the outskirts of Burlington for about 6 months when I got a commission that seemed too good to be true. A regional tourism magazine wanted a series of photos showcasing Vermont's most isolated and picturesque locations. They were paying well, and they wanted shots that tourists never saw. The hidden places, the forgotten corners. It was exactly my kind of work. The editor sent me a list of potential locations, and one immediately caught my attention. An abandoned town called Stillwater, deep in the Green Mountains. I'd never heard of it, but when I looked it up online, I found a few scattered references. Stillwater had been a small logging community in the early 1900s, about 40 families at its peak. According to the sparse information I could find, everyone had left suddenly in 1924. No official explanation, no records of where they went. The town had just been abandoned, and the forest had slowly reclaimed it. The few photos I found online were intriguing. Collapsed houses, an old church with its steeple still standing, a cemetery with weathered headstones. It was perfect. Remote, atmospheric, and apparently rarely visited. I decided to make it my first shoot. I planned the trip for late October, hoping to catch the tail end of fall foliage. The drive from Burlington took almost 3 hours, the last hour on increasingly rough Forest Service roads. My GPS lost signal about halfway in, but I'd printed out directions from a hiking forum where someone had posted about visiting the site. The final 2 miles were on foot. I parked at an overgrown trailhead and loaded my camera gear into my backpack. It was about 1 in the afternoon, and the forest was absolutely silent, except for the crunch of leaves under my boots. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence that sometimes settles over the woods. I found Stillwater after about 40 minutes of hiking. The town appeared suddenly, the trees giving way to a large clearing where nature and abandonment had created something both beautiful and unsettling. There were maybe 20 structures still partially standing, houses with caved-in roofs, a general store with broken windows, that church I'd seen in the photos. Everything was being slowly consumed by vines and moss. The light was perfect, filtering through the trees in golden shafts. I spent about an hour taking photos, moving from building to building, fascinated by the way time had frozen this place. There were still objects inside some of the houses, a rusted iron stove, a broken chair, shattered dishes. In one house, I found a child's doll lying on the floor, its porcelain face cracked, but still somehow serene. That's when I noticed something odd. In every building I entered, there was a door.
Not the front door or back door, but an interior door, always painted black, always closed. They seemed to be in random locations, in the middle of a wall where no door should be, in a corner, once even in the floor of an upstairs room. Each one was just a simple wooden door, painted black, with no visible lock or handle. I photographed several of them, intrigued by this strange architectural quirk. Maybe it had been some kind of local tradition, or a peculiarity of whoever had built these houses. It was odd, but not alarming, until I tried to open one. I was in the old church, photographing the interior where the roof had partially collapsed, letting in streams of sunlight. At the back of the church, behind where the pulpit would have been, there was one of those black doors. This one was different, though. It had a handle, a simple iron ring. I don't know what made me try it. Curiosity, maybe, or the photographer's instinct to document everything. I reached out and pulled. The door swung open silently, easily, despite what must have been decades without maintenance. Behind it was a hallway. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The hallway was impossible. It was too long to fit within the church's dimensions, and it was in perfect condition. Clean white walls, polished wooden floor, and small electric lights along the ceiling that were somehow still working, casting a warm, steady glow. I should have closed the door and walked away. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that something was wrong. But I'd also spent years as a photographer, documenting the strange and unusual, and my curiosity was overwhelming. I stepped through the doorway. The air changed immediately. It was warmer in the hallway, and it smelled like cleaning products and fresh paint. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click, and I felt a moment of panic. I turned and tried the handle. It opened easily, revealing the church interior behind me, exactly as I'd left it. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and turned back to the hallway. There were other doors along its length, maybe 6 or 7, all painted white. At the far end, the hallway turned a corner. I walked slowly forward, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The first door on the right had a small brass plaque that read Thompson. I tried the handle. Locked. The next door, Miller, was also locked. All of them were locked, except the last one, just before the hallway turned. The plaque on this door read Patterson. My name. My hands were shaking as I turned the handle. The door opened into a room that my heart stopped. It was my childhood bedroom, exactly as it had been when I was 10 years old. Same blue wallpaper with planets and stars, same wooden desk where I used to do homework, same shelf full of books and model airplanes, even the same poster of the solar system on the wall. I stumbled backward into the hallway, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. That bedroom had been in my parents' house in Connecticut, and that house had been sold 20 years ago when we moved to Massachusetts. This couldn't be real. I heard a sound from around the corner. Footsteps, steady and slow, coming closer. I should have run back to the black door, back to the church, but I was frozen. The footsteps grew louder, and then a figure appeared around the corner. It was a man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a neat gray suit and carrying a clipboard. He had a kind face, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he smiled when he saw me. "Mr. Patterson," he said warmly, like he'd been expecting me. "Please, Come with me. We have much to discuss." "Who are you?" I asked, managing to ask. "What is this place?" "I'm the curator," he said, still smiling. "And this is the Hall of Doors. We've been waiting for you for quite some time." He turned and walked back around the corner, clearly expecting me to follow. Against every ounce of common sense I possessed, I did. The hallway continued beyond the corner, stretching impossibly far. There were hundreds of doors now, thousands, lining both walls as far as I could see. The curator walked with confident, measured steps, occasionally glancing at his clipboard. "Each door represents a possibility," he explained as we walked. "A path not taken, a choice unmade, a life unlived. The hall exists outside of normal space and time, connecting to moments of significant decision across human history." "That's insane," I said. "This isn't real. I'm hallucinating. Maybe carbon monoxide in one of those old buildings." "You're not hallucinating, Mr. Patterson, though I understand the desire to rationalize. Most people who find the hall react similarly. This one, for instance, belongs to a woman in Seattle. Behind it is the life she would have lived if she'd accepted a job offer in Tokyo instead of staying in America. She visits sometimes in her dreams." "Why do you have a door with my name on it?" The curator's smile faded slightly. "Because you're at a crossroads, Mr. Patterson. You've been running from something for a long time, and you finally reached a point where you must make a choice. The hall appears to people like you, people standing on the edge of fundamental change." He turned and walked back around the corner, clearly expecting me to follow. Against every ounce of common sense I possessed, I did. The hallway continued beyond the corner, stretching impossibly far. There were hundreds of doors now, thousands, lining both walls as far as I could see. The curator walked with confident, measured steps, occasionally glancing at his clipboard. "Each door represents a possibility," he explained as we walked. "A path not taken, a choice unmade, a life unlived. The hall exists outside of normal space and time, connecting to moments of significant decision across human history." "That's insane," I said. "This isn't real. I'm hallucinating. Maybe carbon monoxide in one of those old buildings." "You're not hallucinating, Mr. Patterson, though I understand the desire to rationalize. Most people who find the hall react similarly. This one, for instance, belongs to a woman in Seattle. Behind it is the life she would have lived if she'd accepted a job offer in Tokyo instead of staying in America. She visits sometimes in her dreams." "Why do you have a door with my name on it?" The curator's smile faded slightly. "Because you're at a crossroads, Mr. Patterson. You've been running from something for a long time, and you finally reached a point where you must make a choice. The hall appears to people like you, people standing on the edge of fundamental change." He turned and walked back around the corner, clearly expecting me to follow. Against every ounce of common sense I possessed, I did. The hallway continued beyond the corner, stretching impossibly far. There were hundreds of doors now, thousands, lining both walls as far as I could see. The curator walked with confident, measured steps, occasionally glancing at his clipboard. "Each door represents a possibility," he explained as we walked. "A path not taken, a choice unmade, a life unlived. The hall exists outside of normal space and time, connecting to moments of significant decision across human history. That's insane, I said. This isn't real. I'm hallucinating. Maybe carbon monoxide in one of those old buildings. You're not hallucinating, Mr. Patterson, though I understand the desire to rationalize. Most people who find the hall react similarly. This one, for instance, belongs to a woman in Seattle. Behind it is the life she would have lived if she'd accepted a job offer in Tokyo instead of staying in America.
She visits sometimes in her dreams. Why do you have a door with my name on it? The curator's smile faded slightly. Because you're at a crossroads, Mr. Patterson. You've been running from something for a long time, and you've finally reached a point where you must make a choice. The hall appears to people like you, people standing on the edge of fundamental change. We'd reached another corner. The curator gestured for me to look around it. The hallway opened into a vast circular room, and in its center was an enormous door, easily 20 feet tall, made of black wood and covered in intricate carvings. Unlike the other doors, this one radiated a palpable sense of wrongness. Just looking at it made my stomach churn. "What's behind that door?" I asked. "Nothing," the curator said quietly, "and everything. It's the door that should never be opened. The end of all possibilities, the collapse of all choices into one final, irrevocable decision." Has anyone ever opened it? Once, in 1924, a man from a small logging town stumbled into the hall, much as you did. He was angry, drunk, and deeply unhappy with his life. He found the great door, and despite my warnings, he opened it. My blood ran cold. Stillwater. Yes. The moment he opened the door, every possibility in that town collapsed. Every choice, every potential future, every path not taken, all of it ceased to exist. The town and everyone in it were erased from the fabric of possibility itself. They didn't die, exactly. They simply stopped being possible. And when something stops being possible, it fades from the world like a dream upon waking. I stared at the great door, horrified. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what's at stake, Mr. Patterson. You're carrying a tremendous amount of pain. Your divorce, yes, but also older wounds, childhood trauma you've never fully processed, decisions you regret, roads not taken that haunt you in the quiet moments." He was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. The hall is offering you a choice. You can return through the black door, back to your life, carrying all that pain forward, or you can walk through one of the other doors, the one with your name, or any other that calls to you. You can experience the life you might have lived, the person you might have been. But it wouldn't be real, would it? Reality is more flexible than you think. If you walk through one of those doors and truly commit to the life behind it, the hall will reshape the world to accommodate that choice. You'll wake up tomorrow morning in a life where you made different decisions, with different memories, different relationships. The you standing here will simply cease to exist. That's death. You're describing death.
I'm describing transformation, rebirth, the ultimate do-over. He paused, studying my face. But there's a cost. Everyone you currently know will remember a different version of you, if they remember you at all. And you can never come back to this exact life. Choose wisely, Mr. Patterson, or choose not to choose and return to the world you know. He handed me his clipboard. On it was a list of doors, each with a brief description. I found Patterson and read the note beside it. Life if stayed in Connecticut. Married college sweetheart. 2 children. Successful small business owner. Father still alive. Generally content. Minor regrets about adventures not taken. I felt tears burning my eyes. My father had died 5 years ago. The idea of a life where he was still alive, where I'd made different choices, where I'd avoided the pain of my failed marriage, it was almost unbearably tempting. How long do I have to decide? I asked. As long as you need. Time moves differently here. You could spend years exploring different doors, experiencing different lives, and when you finally return to the church, only a moment will have passed. I looked at the list again, then at the hundreds of doors stretching away in all directions. Behind each one was a different version of me, living a different life. All those possibilities, all those paths not taken, just waiting to be explored. But then I thought about my life, my real life, the one waiting for me beyond the black door. It was messy and painful, yes. I was lonely, I was struggling, I was carrying wounds that hadn't healed. But it was mine, and I chose it, and that means something. I handed the clipboard back to the curator. I want to go back, I said. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. Most people do, eventually. The hall shows you what you might have had, but it also shows you the value of what you actually possess. He walked me back through the hallways to the black door. Before I opened it, I turned to him one last time. The man from Stillwater, what happened to him after he opened the great door? The curator's expression grew sad. He realized too late what he'd done. He'd erased his entire town in a moment of selfish desperation. The hall expelled him back into the world, but the world no longer had a place for him. He spent the rest of his life trying to find Stillwater again, convinced he could somehow undo what he had done. He died alone in these woods in 1956, still searching. I thought about all those abandoned buildings, all those black doors standing like silent sentinels in empty rooms. How many people have found the hall? Thousands over the years, but most close the black door and walk away. The ones who stay, who explore, who try to escape their real lives, they rarely find what they're looking for. Choice is a gift, but it's also a responsibility. We must live with the choices we make. I opened the black door. The church interior was exactly as I had left it, the sunlight still streaming through the collapsed roof. I stepped through and turned to say goodbye, but the door was already swinging shut. In the instant before it closed, I saw the curator raise his hand in a gentle wave. Then I was alone in the abandoned church, my camera bag still on my shoulder, my heart pounding. I checked my watch. Only 5 minutes had passed since I opened the door. I left Stillwater quickly after that, practically running back down the trail to my car. I never submitted those photos to the magazine. I told them I couldn't find the location, that the directions had been wrong. They were disappointed but understanding. I haven't been back to Stillwater, and I never will. But I think about it often, about those doors, those possibilities, those lives I could have lived. And I think about the choice I made to keep the life I have. Things have gotten better since then. I started therapy to deal with the trauma the curator mentioned. I've been working on building real friendships here in Burlington instead of hiding behind my camera. I even started dating someone a few months ago, a teacher named Emily, who makes me laugh and doesn't mind my weird schedule. My life isn't perfect. I still have hard days. I still regret decisions I've made. But it's mine, and I chose it, and that means something. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about all those other doors in the hall. I wonder what version of me is living behind each one, and whether any of them are happier than I am. I wonder if they think about the life they didn't choose, this life, my life, and whether they feel the same mixture of curiosity and relief that I feel when I think about them.
And sometimes I wonder if the black doors are still there in those abandoned buildings, waiting for the next lost soul to open them and face the same choice I faced. I hope, if anyone else finds them, they make the same decision I did. Because here's what I learned in that impossible hallway. Running from your life doesn't make it better. Choosing a different path doesn't erase the pain of the one you're on. The only way forward is through, carrying your scars and your choices, owning every mistake and every triumph. That's what it means to be real. That's what it means to be human. And I wouldn't trade that for all the perfect, painless possibilities in the Hall of Doors.
Story 4 comes from Michael Brennan, Nashville, Tennessee. I was a session musician in Nashville for almost a decade before what happened in the spring of 2017. I played guitar, mostly country and blues, and I'd built up a decent reputation around town. I wasn't famous, but I made a living doing what I loved, and that felt like success to me. I played on albums, did studio work, performed at the Bluebird Cafe and other venues around Nashville. Life was good. The music scene in Nashville is tight-knit, and word travels fast. So when I heard about the Dorsey sessions, I was intrigued. According to the rumors circulating among session players, someone had discovered a collection of unreleased recordings from a legendary but obscure blues musician named Thomas Dorsey, who'd supposedly recorded a series of tracks in Nashville back in 1952 before disappearing without a trace. The story went that these recordings had been found in the basement of an old studio on Lower Broadway that was being demolished. The tapes were in surprisingly good condition, and a local producer named Eddie Marsh had acquired them. He was looking for musicians to help him restore and remaster the recordings, maybe even lay down some additional tracks to fill out the sound. Eddie called me in March. I'd worked with him before on a few projects, and he knew I was into blues history. He invited me to his private studio in East Nashville to hear the tapes and see if I'd be interested in the project. "I'm telling you, Mike," Eddie said over the phone, his voice buzzing with excitement. "This is the real deal. Thomas Dorsey was supposed to be the next big thing back in the 50s. These recordings are incredible, raw, powerful, unlike anything I've ever heard. If we do this right, we could have something special." I arrived at Eddie's studio on a Tuesday evening. It was in a converted house on a quiet street,
The kind of neighborhood where struggling artists and young families lived side by side. Eddie met me at the door, looking tired but energized. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too many hours in dimly lit studios. "Come on in," he said. "I've got everything set up." The studio was in the basement, accessed by a narrow wooden staircase. It was a cozy space, soundproofed walls covered in old band posters, vintage recording equipment alongside newer digital gear, and a comfortable listening area with a worn leather couch. Eddie had the tape machine ready to go, a beautiful old Ampex reel-to-reel that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I've already transferred these to digital for preservation, but I wanted you to hear them the way they were meant to be heard, analog, pure, unfiltered." He threaded the tape onto the machine, and we sat down on the couch. He hit play. The sound that filled the room was extraordinary. Thomas Dorsey's voice came through the speakers with a clarity and presence that seemed impossible for a 65-year-old recording. It was a deep, gravelly voice, full of pain and power, singing about lost love and hard times. The guitar work was equally impressive, complex finger-picking patterns that wove around the vocals like smoke. But there was something else in the recording, something underneath the music. A texture, almost like the sound of wind or distant voices, or maybe both. It was subtle enough that I wasn't sure I was really hearing it. "That's incredible," I said when the first song ended. "The sound quality is unbelievable for something from 1952. "I know, right?" Eddie was grinning. "And it gets better. There are 12 tracks total. Each one is a masterpiece. But here's the thing. I can't find any information about Thomas Dorsey. Nothing. No birth records, no performance history, no photographs. It's like he didn't exist. Maybe it was a stage name? Maybe. But usually there's something. Some record of a performer, especially someone this talented. I've been digging for weeks. Nothing." He played more tracks. Each one was as stunning as the first. Raw, emotional blues that seemed to reach right into your chest and squeeze. But that strange underlying texture was present in all of them, growing slightly more prominent with each song. By the fifth track, it was unmistakable. There were voices in the background, whispering, though I couldn't make out any words. "Do you hear that?" asked Eddie. "The whispering?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I thought it was maybe interference or voices bleeding through from another recording session. But it's on all the tracks, and it's too consistent to be accidental. I think it was intentional, part of the performance somehow." That's weird. Everything about these recordings are weird, man. But weird can be good. Weird sells. He stopped the tape and turned to me. "So, what do you think? You in?" I should have said no. Every instinct I had was telling me something was off about those recordings. But the music was undeniably brilliant, and the chance to work on something potentially historic was too tempting to pass up. "I'm in," I said. We started work the following week. Eddie had assembled a small team, me on guitar, a bass player named Chris, a drummer named Angela, and a keys player named David. The plan was to carefully add some modern instrumentation to complement the original recordings without overpowering them. We'd work in the evenings after Eddie finished his daytime sessions. The first few sessions were productive. We'd listen to a track repeatedly, discussing how to approach it, then lay down some subtle accompaniment. The music was challenging but rewarding,
and the original recordings were so strong that they elevated everything we did. But strange things started happening almost immediately. During our second session, while we were working on a track called Crossroads Calling, all the lights in the studio went out. We were plunged into complete darkness for about 10 seconds before the power came back. Eddie checked the breakers. Nothing had tripped. It just happened. Then David's keyboard started playing notes on its own. We'd be in the middle of playback, and suddenly the keyboard would sound. Just a few random notes, like someone pressing keys, but no one was touching it. He unplugged it, thinking it was some kind of electrical interference, but it happened again the next session. Angela was the first to say something. We were taking a break during our fourth session when she pulled me aside. This is going to sound crazy, but I think someone else is in the studio with us. When I'm playing, I can feel someone standing behind me, and a couple times I've seen something in my peripheral vision, a shadow, moving. I'd felt it too, though I didn't want to admit it. That sense of being watched, of not being alone. We were supposed to be isolated in that basement studio, but it felt crowded somehow. Chris was more blunt. These recordings are cursed, or haunted, or something. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I've worked in studios all over this city, and I've never experienced anything like this. My bass strings keep breaking. I've gone through 6 sets in 2 weeks. My hands are cramping up when I play these tracks, but they're fine any other time. And last night, I had a nightmare about drowning. I woke up and my pillow was soaked. Not with sweat, but with water. Clean, cold water, like someone poured it on me while I slept. We were all experiencing similar things. Equipment malfunctions, unexplained sounds, vivid nightmares. I'd been dreaming about a crossroads in the middle of nowhere with a man standing there in the darkness, waiting for me. And I could always hear that whispering from the recordings, growing louder, almost forming words. Eddie dismissed our concerns. Old studios have weird vibes. It's the history, the energy of all the music that's been made in these spaces. You're just psyching yourselves out. The recordings are fine. The project is going great. Let's just push through. But things escalated during our 7th session. We were working on a track called Devil's Bargain, the longest and most complex of Dorsey's recordings. The whispering in this one was the loudest, almost drowning out parts of the vocals.
We'd been trying to figure out how to approach it when something happened that I still can't fully explain. The tape machine started playing backwards. We were listening to the track when suddenly the music reversed. That distinctive backward sound, eerie and wrong. But none of us had touched the machine. Eddie rushed over to it, checking the controls. Everything was set to forward play. And then we heard the words. When the track played backwards, the whispering became clear. It was chanting, multiple voices speaking in unison. He's listening. He's listening. He's listening. Angela stood up, her face pale. I'm done. I'm out. Whatever this is, I want no part of it. Wait, Eddie said. Just wait. Let me... But she was already grabbing her stuff and heading for the stairs. David followed her. Chris looked at me, then at Eddie, then followed them out. It was just Eddie and me in the studio, the tape still playing backwards, that awful chanting filling the air. Eddie, I said carefully, I think we need to stop. Something is really wrong here. He wasn't listening. He was staring at the tape machine with a strange intensity. Don't you get it? This is real. Thomas Dorsey made a deal. That's what these recordings are. They're evidence.
He sold his soul for musical genius, just like Robert Johnson supposedly did at the Crossroads. And he recorded it, documented the whole thing. These aren't just blues recordings, they're a confession, a warning, a contract. Eddie, you're not making sense. I've been researching, he said, his words coming faster now. There were rumors in the 50s about musicians making deals with something dark. Most of it was just mythology, publicity stunts. But Dorsey was real. He was really there at a crossroads somewhere in Tennessee in 1952. And he really made a deal. And these recordings are proof. Okay, let's say that's true, I said, trying to stay calm. What does that mean for us? Eddie finally looked at me, and his eyes were feverish. It means we're part of it now. We've been added to the contract by working on these recordings. That's why all this is happening. The equipment failures, the nightmares, the whispering. We've connected ourselves to whatever Dorsey connected himself to. I felt ice in my stomach. That's insane. Is it? You felt it too. I know you have. That presence. Something has been in this studio with us every session, listening, watching, waiting. And every track we complete, every note we add, we're feeding it, making it stronger. He reached for the tape machine, and I grabbed his arm. Don't. He has to hear the rest of it. I have to understand what he did, how he did it. Maybe there's a way to... The lights went out again, but this time they didn't come back on. We were in complete darkness, and I could hear Eddie's breathing, fast and panicked, next to me. And then we heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, descending into the studio. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight. The stairs were empty, but the footsteps continued, reaching the bottom, entering the room with us. I could hear them on the concrete floor, moving across the studio, but there was nothing there. Just empty space where something should have been. The tape machine started playing on its own. Not backwards this time, but forward, crystal clear, impossibly loud. Thomas Dorsey's voice filled the darkness. If you're hearing this, you've gone too far. Turn back while you still can. The music is poison. The deal was real, and he's always listening, waiting for someone else to call him forth. Don't finish what I started. Don't complete the... The recording cut off with a sound like tearing fabric. Then silence. The lights came back on. Eddie and I stared at each other, both of us shaking. We have to destroy these recordings, I said, right now. Eddie nodded slowly, the fever gone from his eyes, replaced with fear. Yeah, okay. We spent the next hour erasing everything. The original tapes, the digital transfers, all the files on Eddie's computer, all our session recordings. We took the physical tapes outside and burned them in his backyard, watching the flames consume them while that chemical smell filled the air. Neither of us spoke about what we'd heard, what we'd felt. We didn't need to. I left Eddie's place around midnight and drove home through empty streets, checking my mirrors constantly, feeling like something was following me. That night, I had the worst nightmare yet. I was at the crossroads again, but this time, the figure waiting there spoke to me. His voice was like gravel and smoke, and he said, "The music is still playing, Michael. You can burn the tapes, but the song continues. Once you've heard it, it's part of you forever." I woke up screaming. That was 6 years ago. I haven't played guitar professionally since then. I sold my equipment, left the music scene entirely. I work in construction now, something solid and real, with no connection to art or creativity, or deals made in darkness. Eddie closed his studio a month after that final session. Last I heard, he'd moved to Oregon and was working as an accountant. We never spoke about what happened. I think we both understood that talking about it would be like playing those recordings again, an invitation for something to come back. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I can still hear it, that whispering underneath everything, like a signal you can't quite tune out. And sometimes when I'm alone, I catch myself humming melodies I don't recognize. Complex, beautiful, haunting melodies that seem to come from somewhere else. The music is still playing. I can feel it in my fingers, that urge to pick up a guitar again, to play, to create. But I resist it, because I know the truth now. Some music comes from the soul. Some music comes from skill and practice and love. And some music comes from somewhere else. Somewhere dark and hungry, where contracts are written in sound, and the price for genius is everything you are. Thomas Dorsey learned that in 1952, and 70 years later, in a basement studio in Nashville, so did I. I don't know what happened to Dorsey after he made those recordings. I don't know if he ever escaped the deal he made or if that thing at the crossroads claimed him in the end. But sometimes I think about him, alone in a studio somewhere, singing those incredible songs, knowing that every note was bringing him closer to something terrible. And I think about all the musicians throughout history who supposedly made similar deals. Robert Johnson, Tommy Johnson, countless others whose names have been forgotten. How many of them were real? How many of them left behind recordings like Dorsey's, waiting in basements and archives, ready to ensnare the next generation of musicians foolish enough to listen? The music industry in Nashville moves fast. There are always new projects, new discoveries, new artists chasing success. Sometimes I wonder if someone else has found recordings like the ones Eddie and I destroyed. If they're in some studio right now, listening to that whispering, feeling that presence, thinking they've discovered something valuable. I hope they're smarter than we were. I hope they recognize the danger before it's too late. But I doubt it. The music is too good. The temptation is too strong. And the thing at the crossroads is very, very patient. It can wait for the next person to call it forth. It can wait forever.
Story 5 comes from Jennifer Matthews, Columbus, Ohio. 5 years ago, I was working as a child psychologist in Columbus, running a private practice out of a small office near the Short North Arts District. I loved my work, helping kids process trauma, navigate anxiety, cope with family difficulties. It was challenging but deeply rewarding, and I felt like I was making a real difference in these children's lives. In September of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic when everything felt uncertain and strange, I got a referral that would change everything I thought I understood about my profession and about reality itself. The referral came from the elementary school counselor named Mrs. Peterson. She called me on a Friday afternoon, and I could hear the stress in her voice immediately. "Dr. Matthews, I have a student who I think needs specialized help," she said. "Her name is Emma Caldwell. She's 8 years old, and she's been exhibiting some very concerning behaviors. Her teachers are worried, her parents are at their wits' end, and honestly, I'm in over my head here." "What kind of behaviors are we talking about?" I asked, pulling up my schedule to see when I could fit in a new patient. There was a pause. "She's been drawing disturbing pictures, talking about things she shouldn't know about. And she's been having conversations with someone who isn't there, but it's not typical imaginary friend behavior. It's more intense than that, more specific. Her parents have had her evaluated medically. Everything's normal. They think it might be psychological." I scheduled Emma for the following Tuesday. I'd worked with children experiencing psychotic episodes before, though it was rare in kids so young. More likely, I thought, it was some form of trauma response or severe anxiety manifesting in unusual ways. The pandemic had been hard on kids, disrupting their routines and sense of safety. Emma arrived for her first appointment with her mother, Sarah Caldwell. Sarah was in her mid-30s, professionally dressed despite the stress evident in her face. Emma was small for her age, with long dark hair and large brown eyes that seemed far too old for an 8-year-old. She was carrying a notebook, which she clutched tightly to her chest. I started with Sarah, getting background information while Emma waited in my reception area with my assistant. Sarah explained that Emma had always been a quiet, creative child, no behavioral problems, good student, loved to draw and read. But about 3 months ago, things had changed. She started talking about the man in the walls, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. At first, we thought it was just an imaginary friend. Kids do that, right? But then she started saying things about him that were disturbing. She said he was sad because he'd been stuck in the walls for a long time. He said he wanted to come out, but he needed help. He said he whispered to her at night, telling her secrets. "What kind of secrets?" I asked, taking notes. "That's the thing that scares me most. She's been saying things she couldn't possibly know. Last month, she told my husband that his father was sorry for what happened in 1987. My father-in-law died before Emma was born, and the thing that happened in 1987, it was something Robert never told anyone except me. A mistake at work that almost cost him his job, something he was deeply ashamed of. There's no way Emma could have known about it." I felt a chill run down my spine but kept my expression neutral. Children sometimes overhear more than we realize, or they make lucky guesses that seem more significant than they are. That's what I keep telling myself, but there's more. She knew that I had a miscarriage before she was born. We never told her. We were waiting until she was older. She knew my mother's maiden name, which we'd never mentioned. She knew about a fire at my husband's childhood home that happened 20 years before Emma was born. She knows things, Dr. Matthews, things she has no way of knowing. I spent an hour with Emma that first session. She was polite and articulate, but there was a wariness about her, like she was constantly listening for something. When I asked her about the man in the walls, her face changed, became more serious, more focused. "He's not bad," she said carefully. "He's just lonely. He's been in there a really long time and he wants to talk to someone." "In where? Emma, where is he?" "In the walls. In all the walls. He can move through them like they're water. He says the walls are thin places where his world and our world are close together. He can push through sometimes, just enough to talk." "What does he talk to you about?" Emma opened her notebook and showed me her drawings. Page after page of intricate sketches, architectural drawings of buildings, blueprints, cross-sections showing the spaces inside walls. They were far too sophisticated for an 8-year-old. In several of the drawings, there was a figure, a tall, thin man with no face, standing inside the wall cavities, reaching out. "He shows me where he is," Emma explained. "He wants me to understand how he got stuck. He made a mistake a long time ago and now he can't get out. But he's learning. He's getting stronger. Soon he'll be able to come through completely." I felt that chill again. Stronger this time. "Emma, has this man ever tried to harm you?" "No, he likes me. He says I'm special because I can hear him when other people can't. He says most people are deaf to his voice, but I'm not. He wants to be my friend." Over the next several sessions, I tried different approaches: play therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques, family therapy with her parents. Nothing helped. Emma remained convinced that the man in the walls was real, and her knowledge of things she shouldn't know continued to grow. She told her teacher about a car accident the teacher had been in as a teenager, an accident the teacher had never discussed with anyone at school. She told a classmate where his lost dog had died, under a specific bush in a specific park which turned out to be exactly right when the family checked. She drew a detailed floor plan of a house her grandmother had lived in 50 years ago, a house Emma had never seen even in photographs. The school was getting concerned. Other parents were complaining. Emma was scaring the other children with her knowledge and her constant talk of the man in the walls. I consulted with colleagues, read every case study I could find on childhood psychosis, dissociative disorders, even supposed cases of past life memories. Nothing fit Emma's presentation exactly.
She wasn't delusional in the traditional sense. Her grasp of reality was otherwise normal. She wasn't traumatized or abused. She was simply connected to something, some source of information she shouldn't have access to. During our 6th session, something happened that forced me to confront the possibility that Emma was telling the truth. We were in my office, and Emma was drawing as usual. I'd learned that she was more comfortable talking while her hands were busy. I was asking her about school when she suddenly stopped drawing and looked at the wall behind me. "He's here," she said quietly. "Who's here, Emma?" "The man. He followed me. He wants to meet you." I felt the temperature in the room drop. I'm not exaggerating. It became noticeably colder, enough that I could see my breath. I turned to look at the wall Emma was staring at. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, I saw it. A shadow inside the wall, a darkness that moved with purpose, taking a vaguely human shape. And I heard something. A whisper, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. "She believes now." Then it was gone, and the temperature returned to normal. I sat there, my heart pounding, trying to rationalize what I just experienced. Carbon monoxide? A hallucination brought on by stress? Some kind of shared delusion between me and my patient? But I knew what I'd seen. And more terrifying, I knew what I'd heard. Emma was watching me carefully. "You saw him, didn't you?" I couldn't lie to her. "I saw something." She nodded solemnly. "He said you would. He said you needed to see him so you'd help me. Because I have to help him get out, and I need a grown-up to believe me." "Emma, I don't think helping him is a good idea. He's not evil. He's just lost. He made a mistake, and he's been paying for it for so long. He deserves a chance to be free." Over the following weeks, I did something that could have cost me my license. I started investigating. I researched the building where my office was located, trying to find any history that might explain what was happening. The building dated back to 1923, and it had been many things over the decades: a boarding house, a speakeasy during Prohibition, apartments, and finally commercial office space. I found something in the historical archives at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. In 1934, a man named Thomas Keating had died in the building. He'd been a construction worker, and according to the newspaper report, he'd been working on renovations when part of a wall had collapsed on him. He'd been trapped in a cavity between walls for 3 days before anyone found him. By the time they got him out, he was dead. The article included a photograph. My blood ran cold when I saw it. The man in the photo was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and dark eyes. He looked exactly like the figure Emma had been drawing. I showed Emma the article during our next session. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "That's him," she said finally. "But he looks different now. Being in the walls for so long changed him. He's more like the walls than like a person now. He's become part of the building." Emma, this man died almost 90 years ago. What you're describing isn't possible. Why not? She looked at me with those two old eyes. You believe in ghosts, don't you? Everyone does, a little bit. He's like a ghost, except he's not floating around. He's stuck. The walls trapped him when he died, and he's been there ever since, in all the walls of all the buildings, wherever there are thin places where he can push through. What does he want from you? He wants me to break the walls. He showed me where. There's a place in the basement where the walls are thinnest, where he's closest to getting through. If we make a hole there, he can come all the way out. He can be free. Every professional instinct I had was screaming at me that this was dangerous, that I was dealing with something far outside my expertise. I should have referred Emma to someone else, maybe a specialist in religious or paranormal psychology if such a thing existed. But I felt responsible for her now. And if I'm honest, I was fascinated. I'd spent my entire career studying the human mind, believing that all psychological phenomena had rational explanations. Emma was challenging everything I thought I knew. I made a decision that I knew was reckless. I agreed to go with Emma to the basement. We went after hours when the building was empty. Sarah came too. I'd explained some of what was happening, though I'd left out my own experience seeing the shadow. Sarah was skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything if it meant helping her daughter. The basement of my building was used mainly for storage and utilities. It was dingy and poorly lit, with exposed pipes and brick walls that predated the rest of the structure. Emma led us to a corner where the walls met at an odd angle, creating a small alcove. Here, she said, pointing. This is where he's closest. If we break through here, he can come all the way out. He can be free. I put my hand on the wall. It was cold, much colder than the rest of the basement, cold enough to hurt my palm. And I could feel something, a vibration or pulse, like a heartbeat, coming from inside the wall. Emma, before we do anything, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has this man ever threatened you? Ever made you feel afraid? She thought about it carefully. Sometimes, she admitted. When he's really lonely, he gets intense. His voice gets louder, more desperate, and he shows me things, memories of being trapped, of dying slowly in the dark. It's scary, but I don't think he means to scare me. I think he just can't help it. Sarah grabbed my arm. Jennifer, what are you thinking? We can't just break a hole in the wall because... She stopped because we all heard it. A voice coming from inside the wall, clear and desperate. Please, please, I've been here so long.
Just let me out. Let me out. Let me out. The voice grew louder, more frantic, and the wall began to shake. Dust and bits of mortar fell from the ceiling. The cold intensified until our breath came out in thick clouds. Emma stepped forward, reaching toward the wall, and I saw something that made my heart stop. Her hand began to sink into the wall as if the solid brick were becoming liquid. The wall was opening for her, responding to her, and something on the other side was reaching back. I grabbed Emma and pulled her away. The wall solidified again immediately, and the voice cut off with a sound like a scream being muffled. We're leaving, I said firmly, right now. I pulled Emma toward the stairs, Sarah following close behind. As we climbed up from the basement, I could hear the voice again, fainter now, pleading. Come back. Please come back. Don't leave me here.
don't leave me alone again." We made it to the main floor, and I locked the basement door behind us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. That night, I made some calls. I contacted a priest from the Catholic diocese, explaining the situation as best I could. He agreed to come bless the building, to perform what he called a spiritual cleansing. I also called a contractor I knew and asked him to seal up the basement alcove, completely fill it with concrete, make it solid and impenetrable. The priest came the next day. Father Michael was an elderly man, experienced in what the church called deliverance ministry. He listened to my story without judgment, then spent 3 hours in the building, praying in English and Latin, blessing every room with holy water. When he finished, he found me in my office. "There was something here," he said, "something trapped and suffering. I've asked God to grant it peace and release. Whether that will be enough, I can't say. Some spirits are bound by more than faith can break." The contractor sealed up the basement alcove 2 days later. Emma's symptoms began to improve almost immediately. The drawing stopped, the knowledge of impossible things faded. Within a month, she seemed like a normal 8-year-old again, playing with friends, doing well in school, sleeping through the night without nightmares. I wanted to believe it was over. But 3 months later, I got a call from Mrs. Peterson, the school counselor. Another student had started talking about a man in the walls. A 6-year-old boy named Marcus, whose family had just moved into an apartment building downtown. He was drawing the same pictures Emma had drawn, the figure inside the walls reaching out. He knew things he shouldn't know, and he'd told his mother that the man wanted help getting out, that he'd been trapped for so long that he just wanted to be free. I realized then what we'd done. We hadn't freed Thomas Keating. We hadn't even trapped him. We'd simply pushed him away from one location, and he'd found another thin place, another sensitive child who could hear his voice. He's out there, moving through the walls of Columbus, maybe moving through the walls all over the world, trapped in that space between structure and emptiness, between the living world and whatever comes after, and he's looking for someone to let him out. I closed my practice 6 months after Emma's case. I couldn't continue, couldn't risk encountering another child connected to that thing in the walls. I work in research now, studying childhood psychology from a safe distance, through data and statistics, rather than direct contact. But I think about Thomas Keating often. I think about what it must be like to die slowly, trapped in darkness, and then to discover that death isn't an escape, that you're still trapped, still alone, still desperate for someone, anyone, to acknowledge your existence and end your suffering. I think about all the buildings and all the cities in the world, with their walls and hidden spaces. How many other people died trapped inside them? How many other spirits might be caught in those thin places, whispering to anyone who can hear? And I think about the children who can hear those whispers, children like Emma, sensitive and open, who haven't yet learned that some voices shouldn't be answered, some pleas shouldn't be heeded, some doors shouldn't be opened, even when someone on the other side is begging for help. Emma is doing well now. I check in with Sarah every few months. Emma's a normal teenager, worried about school and friends and all the ordinary things teenagers worry about. She doesn't remember much about that time, or at least she says she doesn't. Sometimes I wonder if she's just learned to stop listening, to close off that sensitivity that made her vulnerable. I hope she has. I hope she never hears those whispers again. But late at night, in my own apartment, I sometimes put my hand against the wall and feel for that cold spot, that pulse, that sense of something on the other side. And I wonder if Thomas Keating found his way here, if he's in my walls now, waiting patiently for me to weaken, to give in, to break through, and let him out. The walls are thin places. That's what Emma told me. Places where one world presses close to another, and sometimes something from the other side presses back. I just pray the walls hold. For all our sakes, I pray they hold.